Paul McNulty, welcome to the program. We're going to talk about a lot of things today, I hope, and we're going to try to keep it to a reasonable amount of time just to honor your time and to honor our readers' attention span. But I want to start with just talking a little about Grove City College itself before we talk about your tenure there. Grove City College, and I should confess, it's kind of a disclosure to our listeners. My daughter went to Grove City College as a faithful, loyal graduate of Grove City. She had a fantastic experience here. So, I'm not going to be wholly objective in our conversation today. But Grove City College has a unique history. It has a unique history in the world of higher education and in Christian higher education in particular. And a lot of that was the result of a lawsuit that went all the way to the Supreme Court, was ultimately adjudicated, I believe you told me before we started, in 1984. And that was a kind of a defining moment for Grove City. So can you talk a little about the history of Grove City and why that moment was so special?
Sure. Well, first of all, Warren, thanks for letting me join you on this and for the work of Ministry Watch. Really appreciate the contribution it makes to the integrity of the Christian organizations globally. Um, yeah, I mean, Grove City is a very distinctive institution in the world of higher education. It's a mix of conservative economics and ideology in general, but also very much a Christian college. And so it's got some real roots in these convictions and in these distinctives. And that Supreme Court case was really about what it means to be an independent school. Grove City College had thought for decades that it did, because it didn't take federal funds directly, that it was independent of federal control. There wasn't much to worry about in federal control for decades. But then in the early 70s, with the passage of Title IX and the civil rights laws, Grove City had no problem with the issue of discrimination against women in sports, but it did have a problem with the idea of the federal government reaching in and saying, now you'll comply with every regulation that comes down the pike as a result. The college refused to go along with a general compliance sort of blank check that the government was requiring, and that's what went to the courts. And the specific issue was whether financial aid to the students was considered funding to the college. And we took the position that that was money for the students to use. Government said no, it was money directly to the school. Eventually, that got to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court ruled in 1984 in a case called Grove City versus Bell, and that financial aid was funding to the institution, and therefore the institution would have to comply as a result of that. Well, having that clarified, we cut off all financial aid from the federal government. And it was a defining moment for us in many ways because, as I say, it was the best thing that ever happened to Grove City because it gave us the opportunity to go out and say to our supporters, we want to stand for independence, and so we're going to need your help. And so as a result, we have developed a very robust endowment and we fund all of our financial aid. We don't discount, which is a whole nother conversation, but it did set us on a path of reinforced, reestablished independence that has served us really well since that time.
Yeah, I've talked to a number of people about this because I've had a longstanding interest, in part because my daughter went to school there, and also just in part because I think this is a really important, kind of moment in the conservative movement and in, I think, higher education as well. And sometimes people have characterized that Supreme Court case to me in this way, Paul, and I'm just wondering how you respond to that, is that Grove City lost the battle, but
Mm,
they won the
mm,
war.
mhm.
And today, um, Grove City College, and I may get this wrong a little bit, and you can correct me. Grove City College, Hillsdale College, and Patrick Henry College, I believe, are the only three colleges in the country that are in sort of precisely the category that Grove City is in.
That's correct. There are a few other smaller institutions that have been able to avoid federal funding as well, but essentially it's about a half dozen at most. And
Yeah.
so now there are a lot of schools at this moment, as you were just alluding to, seriously considering whether or not they can make the shift. And we occasionally at Grove City College get calls from presidents and CFOs and others wanting to explore what that will involve and how we do it. So I expect at some point these numbers are going to grow, but at this point, it's been a very small number that have been able to stay the course.
Well, one of the things that I wanted to talk with you today about is just how Grove City has flourished in an environment where a lot of colleges and a lot of Christian colleges in particular are having problems. We cover here at Ministry Watch a lot of colleges that have shut down over the last 5 years, a lot of colleges that have merged over the last 5 years, a lot of colleges that are in financial difficulty. Grove City's not one of those, and I think that we've already identified one of the reasons that it is totally independent and it has a passionate and loyal donor base in part as a result of that. I interviewed your predecessor about 10 years ago, Richard Jewell, who was the president of Grove City College at the time. One of the things that he said to me, and I'm just wondering if you could, sort of give me your reaction to that, was that one of the things that Supreme Court case also allowed was for Grove City to really take a hard look at its administrative costs, its overhead costs. He said, for one of the things he said to me that stuck with me is that Grove City doesn't have any manufactured expenses, doesn't have any manufactured costs, doesn't have to have a government compliance office, for example, doesn't have to have a staff of people writing government grants, for example. And one of the things that has allowed Grove City to do, I don't want to go too far down you said that about discounting earlier, and that might be something that we could or may not talk about. I don't want to talk about too much, except to say this: the Grove City is very affordable compared to other colleges at the elite level that Grove City is at. And I'm just wondering if that's also another reason for the success.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you put your finger on one of the benefits of being independent is we do avoid some significant costs other schools have to incur to comply. And so it's fair to say that we not only do we avoid that, but more fundamentally, we've always been very careful, very conscientious as stewards about our costs. And so, apart from the Supreme Court decision, Grove City College was always and still is a good deal in higher education costs because of that attention paid to all of the costs that get pushed onto students. And because of government assistance, schools often just ramp up their expenditures, figuring that students can always borrow in order to kind of get what they need, and they can borrow easily from the federal government. And that's part of the financing of higher education that is really crippling the whole industry and is coming closer and closer to a breaking point as I see it.
Paul, I want to get you to address another issue that kind of in some ways also relates to that Supreme Court decision. You graduated in 1980. The lawsuit was underway at that time, but it wasn't resolved, as we said, until 1984. After 1984, I think a lot of people would observe that Grove City took a more conservative pivot at that time. That up until then, I think it would be fair to characterize Grove City as fairly conservative before then, but there was, some would argue, a liberal drift in higher education, even religious higher education in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. Grove City made that pivot and became a much more conservative institution. In some ways, though, that bifurcated your alumni base, right? I mean, that you've got some friends of mine who are on longtime staff members there told me that in some ways, whenever they were fundraising or trying to do development for the school, they had to kind of be aware of when that person graduated. Were they going to be excited about the conservative pivot in the school, or were they going to be alienated by that? First of all, is that an accurate characterization, and what would you say about that?
Yeah, I mean, that's fair. I would sort of restate it this way that Hans Sennholz was this legendary professor in beginning from the 1960s all the way until he retired at the start of the 21st century. And he was one of the leading Austrian economists in the world, and really gave Grove City a distinctive conservative economics position. But generally speaking, in the world of economics and politics and so forth, Grove City was pretty consistently conservative. But in relation to its spiritual identity, in relation to its core Christian convictions, I think as the main line drifted in the 60s, the college was drifting with it. And so Charles Mackenzie came along in 1971 with the purpose of really bringing it back to a more conservative evangelical Christian identity. J. Howard Pugh was at the end of his life when he hired Mackenzie in 1971, passed away before the man. Mackenzie actually started his first day, but he had a mission. And I was a student there and benefited greatly from the faculty Mackenzie brought to Grove City College to give it this much more focused Christian, conservative Christian identity. And that's where I think you alluded to the sort of bifurcated view. I think as the school became more intentional and more focused in its Christian mission, some felt like that wasn't the school I went to. I didn't remember it being so Christian. And but I was transformed by that. And part of my story is that I came back then in 2014 now to be president, having been essentially discipled and shaped and molded by Grove City College in that change, and had the privilege of being able to pick that up and then enhance that as our focus, which has been something that we has been greatly blessed over the past decade or so to sharpen our focus on our Christian identity.
Well, I do want to come to your tenure and ask you a few more questions about that. But just one more point I'd like to make about sort of the history of Grove City and just again, get your reaction to it. You mentioned J. Howard Pugh. J. Howard Pugh was one of the great philanthropists, industrial titans of the 20th century, a great benefactor to many Reformed and Presbyterian causes, and of course, especially to Grove City. And you mentioned Dr. Mackenzie, who became the president. Um, Help me, give me your perspective on this. I've talked to a lot of people who have know about that era in the history of Grove City College. An era that has become fascinating to me because it's one of the few examples, really, in evangelical history, I would say, where you have an usually the slide towards liberalism is a one-way street, right?
Right.
There are not lots of organizations that go down that slippery slope and then turn around and fight
Hmm.
their way back up.
Hmm.
Grove City is one of the few organizations that has done that. You mentioned A. Howard Pugh, you mentioned Dr. McKenzie, you mentioned the Supreme Court case. But I do wonder if you could talk a little bit about the student body there, and to what extent. I had someone tell me that even with a committed benefactor, a committed board, and a committed president, it took 20 years to turn Grove City around. And one
Hmm.
of the key factors there was that you had an admissions department that went actively telling that story
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
were attracting conservative students who
Hmm.
didn't have good alternatives elsewhere. Is that a
Hmm.
part of this story that's accurate?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, when you try to change a brand, when you try to change a trajectory and how that's communicated, how the marketplace of potential students reacts, that takes time. And again, in the 70s, I was watching this change taking place with the arrival of these new professors and their just clear commitment to Christian higher education. But as students were applying, were they aware of that? How much did that influence their decision? Was it more driven by cost and the strength of certain academic programs, which is always an important factor? Yeah, I think it wasn't probably until the 90s that where students were really understanding, that is high school students understanding that, well, if I'm going to go to a Christian college, here are the options. And by the way, Grove City College is going to be one of those schools that will fit in there with that limited number of schools that are serious about that commitment, and also academically excellent, and have good programs, and place where I see myself fitting in. Campus has always been beautiful. It's always been 2,000 plus students, has a lot of energy, but this was the key thing that had to get communicated over time. And the admissions department plays a large role in that. And now in the world of social media, every single day, literally every hour of a day, Grove City is able to promote its identity and connect with students. And that was one of our big priorities over the past 11 years to make sure that messaging was communicating what we wanted people to know about the soul of Grove City College.
Paul, I want to get to your tenure as president, but I want to back up a little bit and talk about sort of the arc of your career and ask you a few questions about that. Because as you say, you graduated from Grove City in '80, I think law school in '83, and then you had a series, a succession of jobs in mostly in government, as I recall, until you ended up working in the Bush administration. And I know that a lot of times people learn more from their challenges in life than their successes in life. Their successes in life are the things they want to talk about, but the challenges in their lives are the things that actually probably formed their character and kind of gave them some lessons. What were some of the time that you were in the Bush administration was a tumultuous time for the country. It was right after 9/11. You ended up being a central player in a controversy that happened in the firing of a lot of U.S. attorneys in 2007, 2008. Talk a little. I mean, we're going to have to skip over a whole lot, but I do want you to, if you could, focus on those 6 or 7 years of your career.
Mhm.
What did you learn? What did you take away? What happened there that made you an effective president at Grove City College?
Hmm. Well, that's a great question. Yes, the first part of that time, I spent 10 years on Capitol Hill as an attorney, and I got to know just a lot of the leaders in Washington over a span of time that began in the 80s and up until that time of the Bush administration. Um, and And so, of course, 9/11 was a main focus of my life for about at least 5 years, as I was the U.S. Attorney in Eastern Virginia. But coming into the job of Deputy Attorney General, I was a very well-known person in Washington, D.C. Chuck Schumer and I had a very good personal relationship. He was, at that point, not as powerful as he is today, but he was pretty powerful at the time.
Well, I just want to pause and marinate in that idea that a
Yeah,
conservative Republican and
yeah.
Chuck Schumer would be friends. But that's so okay.
Well,
Anyway,
Warren, I think what it does is it points us back to a time that's hard for us to remember when uh, people of very different views tried to have sincere relationships and try to find common ground from time to time, or just thought that civility was especially important. And I came to Washington, D.C. with some strong convictions that were, instilled in me at Grove City College about what it was going to look like to be a Christian in public service. Not just a person in public life who happened to be a Christian, but what it meant to have a Christian approach to my work. And so it was about how I treated other people, how I spoke, how I try to think about the facts of an issue rather than just jumping on political bandwagons and so forth. And over time, by God's sweet providence, that was a blessing, and it served me well. So that by the time I was nominated to be Deputy Attorney General, I was unanimously confirmed. I'm not sure how many people have been unanimously confirmed since 2006. But perhaps what happened, as you alluded to, the U.S. Attorney matter, which frankly was kind of just a Democrat effort to go after Humberto Gonzalez, who was the Attorney General at the time in the Department of Justice, and by today's standards was a minor matter when we think about the issues that are going on. But yes, as that sort of unfolded, the lesson learned for me was, I I believe that my relationships with people on the other side of the aisle on Capitol Hill would have a significant impact on the way in which we work together to get to the bottom of the facts. But the politics of it all was just overwhelming. And and so if I had to do it all over again, I'd probably be every day more on my guard as to what the forces, how the forces were aligning against us, and
Right.
to be especially attentive to that, not as trusting as I was. But in the end of the day, it played out well for me, and I'm thankful for that. And I think that Washington is just a place that is extremely hard to sort of stand your ground and at the same time, um, uh, get things done in a way that is necessary in order to advance the public interest. So glad that I'm through those years. And then, of course, they helped me at Grove City, I think, just in the sense that um, nothing surprises me. I'm pretty seasoned that way, and so I'm able to take the um, moments that and the issues that arise with a certain peace, knowing that I've just seen God's hand in my life over and over again, and know that um, that I can trust that sticking to the right things is going to play out fairly well over time.
Yeah, and of course it did for you in that case as well. You ended up after leaving government, going to Baker McKenzie, which for those of our listeners who don't know, let's just say that Baker McKenzie is one of the absolutely bluest of the blue chip law firms in the country, and Paul, without being too crass here or putting too fine a point on it, I'm guessing they pay pretty well for a guy like you
Right.
as well.
That was finally a time in my life when it wasn't quite like the government salary that I had
Yeah. Well, which brings me to
survived
this
on.
question. Why go to grow? I mean, you were 20-year career in government that gave you the contacts or the deep Rolodex that that a law firm like Baker McKenzie wants and needs to stay at the top of their game. My guess, I mean, I don't know what happens at Baker McKenzie when inside the partners meetings, but my guess is you could have been there a long time and you could have
Hmm.
retired a very wealthy man.
Yeah.
And yet, after 5 or 6 or 7 years there, um, you went back to Grove City College, and I'm sure Grove City treated you well financially, but there is an old joke about college presidents, and that is they live in a mansion, they sleep in a mansion by night and beg for money by day. And now I've been to Grove City. It's not exactly a mansion, but it's a pretty nice house. And so what lured you from the halls of Washington and a great salary back to Western Pennsylvania?
Well, you're right that that we did sacrifice millions of dollars to be able to go to Grove City. But I will say that when the opportunity came along, the question was, did I believe that there was um, this wonderful privilege of being able to shape young people who are upstream in culture? I'd gone to Washington because I thought I want to try to have an impact. I want to try to see if I can just move the needle a little bit in the way in which the federal government operates, in the world of public policy and politics. And and what I came to realize was that these were deep cultural issues that were playing out there, and they were affected by the way in which young people were being prepared for the world ahead. And so my wife and I knew that there was a tremendous opportunity to have this privilege of influencing young people. I had just lost a son to cancer at age 26, 2012. And I think through that experience, I came to love even more that sort of age group. He was a strong believer as the time he came to his death, and that was such a comfort and encouragement. But it made me realize this is what matters most: is uh, what are young people learning? How are they being shaped? How are they being prepared for life's most difficult situations. And I developed a passion for that. And so it actually wasn't that hard of a decision. We enjoy the comforts of life, but we've been blessed richly, and we didn't need to keep gathering more of it. We thought that this was going to be just an incredible experience to be involved in the lives of young people. And that's what it turned out to be, too. I mean, beyond even what I had expected. And so, yeah, major change. I had a big learning curve when it comes to the world of higher education from law, but people were patient with me, and the ideas and the learning came along.
Yeah. Well, Paul, if you're willing, first of all, I'm sorry about your son. I know you said it was in 2012, which is now, what, 13 years ago, but I know those wounds, um, the pain becomes less acute, but it never completely goes away. So let me just say I'm sorry for your loss there.
Thank you.
And um, if you would allow me for a moment, and I don't want to make this uncomfortable for you or for our listeners or anyone, but um, what was helpful for you during that time? I know a lot of times people will, whenever someone like you goes through the loss of a child, for example, or the loss of a spouse, or any kind of a major deal, people want to be helpful,
Yeah.
but they don't know how to be helpful. What was helpful for you that other people said or did during that era, during that time?
Well, one thing I learned was that don't be afraid to talk to someone about what they're experiencing or the loss. I think most people think I'm not going to bring that up because what I'll do is just trigger these memories and these feelings, and I'm just going to make a painful moment for my friend. Well, the reality is you never stop thinking about it. It's always on your mind. Not in the sense of a haunting, at least in our case, we haven't been burdened by it, but you know, God gave us four children. This is one of our four, and he was gone. And so I'm not forgetting that. And so therefore, when it's being brought up, you should know that you should not be afraid because it's actually welcome because it's a chance to maybe give testimony to what the Lord did in the situation. It's also an opportunity to even just think positively about someone you love dearly. So that's the first thing is, talk to your friends. Don't be afraid. Um, we're missing an arm after you lose a child. And so to say, what happened to your arm is perfectly appropriate. Um, the other thing is, we were really well prepared. I just want to stress this more than anything else. You can't create theology in the moment of crisis. It's really difficult to do that. You've got to have a foundation of understanding about um, how to think about death, how to think about our lives in a way that precedes that crisis and other crises. And we were super well prepared. We had been a part of a church where the preaching was strong, and we just where we felt fortified as this unfolded. Totally unexpected to have a 24. It took 2 years to take his life, but for a 24-year-old to develop a cancer that couldn't be cured, totally unexpected. But when that moment came, I remember going to my son's apartment. He lived in Washington, D.C., and he was about to go to a key appointment, which would confirm where we were. And I came in to pick him up, and I sat down with him, and I pulled out Psalm 112, and I said, the godly man does not fear bad news. And he looked me in the eye and he said, I understand that. I get that. And the two of us just immediately were on the same page. And for the rest of the way, that's how he responded to what was one bad news moment after another. And so you can't get that just on the fly. That's an important priority for life's developing your Christian life. And that's again back to Grove City College. That's what I wanted our students to be aware of. I didn't talk about this, but I mean just in the idea of getting themselves prepared for the journey ahead and all the things that they will potentially confront.
Well, Paul, first of all, I really appreciate you sharing that with me, and I'm grateful that you would honor us with that story. And at the risk of too hard of a pivot here from that story to what I'm about to ask next, is that now, that was in 2012. you get this call to come back to Grove City College in 2014. You take that role with these fairly recent life experiences, the death of your son, the departure from government service, with this fantastic income at a blue chip law firm. I mean, these are some of the experiences that prepare you for this moment in 2014. When you arrive, what are your marching orders? What did you tell the board when they hired you? I'm sure there was a conversation that you had some expectations of things that you wanted to accomplish. They probably had some expectations of you that they needed you and wanted you to accomplish. What did that conversation look like? What were the things that you set out to do?
That's a great question. Well, first of all, I was on the board of trustees at the time, and I had been on the board for 10 years. So I was pretty well aware of where the school was and what we were prioritizing. And so I said to the search committee and then ultimately to the full board in that multi-month process, um, first and foremost, I'm going to come in here and I'm going to talk without hesitation and with as much clarity as possible about what it means to be a Christian college. Because I think that what a president of a Christian college needs to do is be the voice to essentially, you know, be that continuous narrator of why we exist, why we are doing what we're doing today and tomorrow, and what's the purpose of your education and so forth. So I made it very clear. This was no bait and switch. If you want me, this is what I'm going to do. And wonderfully, the board was excited about that and said, that's great. Do it. And so more than anything else, that was kind of the opening chapter, is just to say, I'm going to give voice to this identity and let's think about how we even build it out. When I was a student there was definitely a Christian identity, but you could go into a lot of pockets of campus life and not have to worry about what Christ means to this piece of the school. And one of the things I said to the staff was, I don't want there to be any place. Sounds a little Kuyperian. I don't want there to be a place, any place on this campus where you don't experience what it means to be a Christian college. In the dorm room, relationships, and the RA, and the sports fields, everywhere. It just permeates our life together. And people responded beautifully to that. And that was the primary focus. We were finishing a campaign. Dick Joel had done a wonderful job of stewarding that process, and so was finishing work on that. But it wasn't about fundraising at that moment. It turned into being the next step down the road, the
Right.
largest campaign in the school's history, and we got that launched, and it's still ongoing. But at that point, I think that was the idea. And then there was an opportunity, I think, on the academic side to think about what new programs would help us in the marketplace, and starting a school of nursing and a school of business and so forth. Those were things that are really important to the success of an institution. And I also wanted to focus on the student experience. Grove City was kind of stuck in some ways in terms of how it wanted to handle basic things that students experience day in, day out, food, athletics, you name it. And the challenge was, how can we pursue excellence in all these areas? And our football team became kind of a symbol of that, because we were winless for 3 years, my first 3 years, and we were determined that those days were going to end. And when we became conference champions, it just seemed to kind of capture this idea that, hey, excellence has to go in every direction, and the experience needs to be addressed. And so it's been fun to see that turnaround in the midst of it all. But that I think was the mindset with me and the board was, hey, what is our identity, and how do we really promote that identity as an institution?
Well, Paul, you're now at the end of your tenure, and whether you like it or not, if 100 years from now the history of Grove City College is written, that by then that'll be a 250-year history and not just a 150-year history or whatever it is today. You'll get a few paragraphs. You might even get a chapter in that book. But we've already mentioned a couple of your predecessor presidents. There will be many, Lord willing, there will be many to follow. What do you want that paragraph to say about your 10, 11-year tenure at Grove City College?
I think probably more than anything else that I picked up the baton that Charles McKenzie held and ran with for 20 years in his turning the college around from the 60s into the 90s. That I picked up that baton and I ran with it in the 21st century to strengthen and to uh, refocus us to be um, able to say that you know that we are a premier Christian college in the United States. So if that was said, that under his leadership, the college became better defined, clearer mission, and what it means to have a Christ-centered institution. Boy, I would be extremely thankful for that legacy.
Yeah. So Paul, where are you now? You've retired from Grove City College. Successful tenure there. You and I are almost exactly the same age, so I'm going to
Yeah.
call you a young man. Or let me just say that I hope you have years ahead of you. But I personally, I don't believe in the biblical. I don't believe that retirement is a biblical category, but I do believe that God calls us into new seasons of ministry. And I'm just
Right.
wondering what that's going to look like for you.
Yeah, and in my defense, I didn't think I was so much retiring as I was just stepping down after 11 years. Being a president of college is a pretty taxing experience. You live on campus. It's a 24/7 deal. And so I thought, it's probably time for me to pass this on to someone else. But then everybody started congratulating me on my retirement. And so I had to kind of deal with that perspective. So I'm still associated with the school as now the senior fellow for faith and public life. And as many may know, Vice President Mike Pence came and joined our team last year as the distinguished visiting fellow for faith and public life. And he and I taught 4 classes together last year. And so we're continuing to collaborate at Grove City. I'm not there to teach the class with him, but the new president, Brad Lingo, and Paul Kenger, who's one of our star faculty members, in the springtime, the two of them and me and Mike Pence were teaming up to teach a course together. And then Mike Pence and I are doing some programs this fall. So I'm continuing to advance this idea of what it looks like to be a Christian in public square. And then I'm on a couple boards that where I'm hoping I can provide uh, a contribution towards, good leadership, good governance, and I have some other possibilities in that area that we'll see how they play out. I was appointed recently by the PCA to be on the study committee for Christian nationalism, which was a, a, an assignment that came out of the General Assembly, and we were to produce a paper on that. So lately, I've been doing a lot of reading in that area and collaborating with others who are on that study committee. So I'm really thankful for the flexibility to work on projects that I greatly enjoy or areas of interest to me, and I'm waiting on God's providence as to what these other board and leadership possibilities can be. We are in Charleston, South Carolina. That's where we've moved, and we spend some time in Maine in the summertime, and we have a daughter who lives in Ireland. So the flexibility to travel to see our 7 grandchildren is key, and so we've been greatly blessed in this new season.
Well, so Paul, I've been fascinated by the PCA, Presbyterian Church in America's task force that you've been appointed to, and you don't. I'm guessing you don't want to make any news today, and let me know what direction that task force is going. Am
That's a
I
really
right
strong
in?
guess. That's a good guess, Warren. You hit that one on the head.
Yeah.
Well, of course, it's just at the start as well. So even if I was inclined to do something that would be contrary to my experience in DC, it would be that they're not it's just the beginning of that process. So
Yeah. Well, let me just say that I think the world is waiting for that report. To be perfectly honest with you,
Mm,
Paul, I mean,
mm,
I've often said that the PCA punches above its weight, and
mm.
it's a relatively small denomination that has a huge impact, I think, on evangelical on as on evangelical public life in this
Mm,
country. I mean,
mm,
some of the again, for a small denomination, it has produced some of the great Christian thought leaders of the
mm.
last 50 years, from D. James Kennedy to Tim Keller, now you and others. So I'm personally looking forward to that report and believe that it'll have a big no pressure, no pressure,
You're
Paul,
right,
but I
right.
think that
Well,
it'll.
it's some really talented people. That Kevin Young, by the way, another great leader in the PCA, is the
Absolutely, yeah,
moderator this year of the General Assembly, and he assembled a
yeah.
very strong team. And I'm just hoping that I can add some
Well, before we
value.
go, I can't resist asking you about one particular board that you're on, because that's kind of how we came back to. I mean, obviously, I knew who you were. My daughter, we've already talked about my association with Grove City College. I've been wanting to interview you for a long time, but what precipitated that was being at the Sing conference in Nashville, Tennessee, that Keith and Kristyn Getty put on with, I guess, you and me and Keith and Kristyn and 5,000 or 6,000 of our closest friends there. We reconnected there, and you were gracious enough to agree to having this conversation. Tell me about your involvement with Sing, because everything that we've talked about up until now doesn't, wouldn't lead me to guess that you have an involvement with the Gettys and with their uh, Sing project and sort of the worship philosophy that they are trying to promote in the world. So where does that come from?
Yeah, that's a very good insight, and it's certainly true in terms of my musical abilities. Um, well, I didn't think that this podcast necessarily would take on the theme of suffering and so forth, but it's a great story. I have to go back to that time in 2012, shortly before my son passed away. He sent his sister, one of his sisters, she was a student at Grove City College at the time. She was a junior. He sent her an email, and he attached to that email, "Speak, O Lord," one of the Getty's songs, a fantastic song. He attached that song to the email and said, "Spread this around GCC." And this was 5 days before the Lord took him home. So later after that, my daughter showed me that email, and I was just deeply moved and very comforted again to think that hymn would have been on his heart at that point, because that's a powerful hymn. Alistair Begg actually asked the Gettys to write that hymn for his church as they were, preparing for the preaching of the word. That's what that hymn really speaks to.
Yep.
Well, months later, just about 4 months later, I ran into Keith Getty in Washington, D.C., and they were doing a concert. Didn't know him, hadn't met him before in my life, but he was standing in the back of a church in Northern Virginia. And I walked up to him and said, "Hey, can I tell you a story?" And I told him that story about Speak, O Lord, and he was moved deeply by it. And we became friends instantly. Um, and so once he got to know more about who I was and what I was doing, at that point I was, at my law firm, and wasn't president yet. Well, when I came to Grove City a year or so later, the Gettys came, did a concert, sang "Speak, O Lord" in my inauguration service, which had everybody in tears.
Wow.
And so from that point on, we just developed a deep friendship. I brought him back to the college again, and we've collaborated. Then I had a daughter who moved to Northern Ireland to go to Queen's University, and married the music director at a church called Glen Abbey, which is where Kristyn Getty was raised. Her father was a longtime pastor of that, and he was the mentor to my son-in-law. So now it became kind of like family. And all of that has just been a part of the story of being involved with Getty Music. Um, and um, and then the foundation is a nonprofit arm of the business to try to promote theologically rich, biblically faithful, artistically beautiful congregational singing around the world. And so we're still working on. It's kind of the early days of the foundation in many ways, looking at what the vision is for this and how we're going to advance it. But that's my work with them, and it's been a great blessing. But I'm a huge supporter of what they do to reach back and get the richest hymns of the past and combine them with some great songs that have real depth to them today. And the new hymnal is remarkable. If you haven't seen it, if your listeners haven't seen it, they really ought to, because it's a
Yeah, well, I've got a copy right here on my
yeah.
this little table behind me. I could not agree with you more, and was delighted to see you at the same conference, and really edified to hear that story that you just shared, and really makes connects a lot of dots for me. So, Paul, I'm really grateful for you sharing that story. I'm grateful for your time. Often, whenever I conclude a conversation with someone like you, where it is impossible for us to have covered everything, I like to ask this question: is there something that I just didn't have time or wasn't smart enough to ask? Or is there something in the midst of everything we did talk about that you want to just make sure that our listeners leave with? Is there some key idea that you want to make sure doesn't get lost here?
Yeah, well, I appreciate the amount of ground we did cover. I think you said at the beginning that one of our uh, areas of focus would be Grove City, and it has been. And I want to say that for families listening, I think the question more and more is, um, what are the choices in higher education? And to be as thoughtful about the fact that um, there are just way too many institutions that are not paying attention to um, the way that a worldview is developed in school. And you and I experienced it in a really positive way, and so many others did, but it's not something you can just take for granted today. And I've been shocked at the way in which Christians have come to accommodate themselves to a lot of things in our culture today that aren't acceptable. But I think it's part of it is because it's so easy to buy into the philosophy of the day that we are the center of everything and that we determine whether or not we want to something's right or something's wrong. You think about the profanity at the recent Ryder Cup. Well, part of that is that people now think that language is my language. It doesn't have to adhere to some kind of objective standard that might offend someone else. It's just my authentic self speaking, right? These are dangerous philosophies that are permeating academia, have permeated academia, and families need to be well aware of that as they think about higher education. And schools like Grove City College and Covenant College and others are trying to very carefully navigate that challenge. And I think that's where Christian college has to be sorted out as to how intentional are they being about the influences of the culture in the way we cater to students and the way that professors teach. And so I'm really thankful for the way that the Lord is blessing Grove City and other schools to try to stay the course in a way that will, bless the world around us in the years to come.
Paul, that's a good word to end on. Paul McNulty, thank you so much for being on the program today. I'm grateful.
Thank you, Warren. It's been fun to be with you.